Well, no one has showed up for the exam 1 review. It is now 11:12. I thought I'd wait 12 minutes or 10 minutes to see if anybody showed up, and no one has. So hopefully that means you guys are going to do really good on the exam and you don't need my help. But just in case, I guess I'll just sit here and talk to myself and go over the study guides. Mind you, I have my kids in the background, and this is all after office hours, so I don't technically have to be here. So that means two things. One, I might have to leave every once in a while, and you're going to hear some wild noises because I'll be taking care of regular everyday things. And two, this video might end abruptly without any warning. So keep that in mind. Anyway, what I'm going to do, since nobody's here to tell me what they need help with, I'm going to, again, try to go through all the study guides and talk about why the answers are the correct answers, why the incorrect answers are the incorrect answers, tell you what might be on the exam, tell you what might not be on the exam. And yeah, that's it. So here we go. First thing I want to do is present my screen because some of you might not know how to find the study guides. So here we go. Let's look at it. If we go to the classwork, we'll start here at the top. Chapter 1, you can see right here, scroll down. There's the PowerPoint, which you can look at. There's all the old videos, which I highly recommend watching or even listening to. Maybe tonight when you're going to bed, if you want to bore yourself to sleep, put in your headphones and listen to these videos. Anyway, here we go. Study guide. Let's look at Chapter 1 study guide. I'm not going to see. Let me say this too. You'll notice that these are shuffled. And that's exactly how your exam is going to be. It'll also be shuffled. And what I'm going to do is go through them shuffled as opposed to unshuffling it, because what I don't want this video to be is basically a way for you to just go in and answer all the questions and get them all right without thinking about them, right? I still want you to do the study guides if you haven't. I still want you to think about those questions, because thinking about them is what's going to help you prepare for the exam, not just answering questions blindly. So anyway, let's look at this one. It's basically asking what science is. It is this one. It is the inquiry-based effort to describe and explain nature. The search for truth, that's not specific enough, right? It's too vague. I mean, you could say history is the search for truth. You could say religion is the search for truth, right? So that's not specific enough. This one, an organized set of principles for how to behave ethically and morally. I mean, there are standards of how to behave ethically and morally in science, but science itself, like the scientific process, strictly speaking, does not include that. So yeah, the answer is A. What is biology? You should really get this. The answer is the scientific study of life. Don't guess the study of life. That will be one of the options, even though it's not an option here. I'm going to put the study of life, but remember, we had a whole discussion of why it is the scientific study of life and not simply the study of life. Okay, a reliable source about the usefulness of an herbal supplement is likely to be recognizable by all but one of these characteristics. Choose the exception. So let's see, what are we dealing with here? The information is a primary source. That's helpful. The information is peer-reviewed. That's helpful. Many references are cited. That helps. And the authors are employed by the manufacturer of the supplement. There you go. There's the answer. One of these things is not like the other, right? That is the red flag. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's not good information, but it's a red flag that it possibly could be, because there's obviously a conflict of interest there. So yeah, that's the answer to that. And when I reword these questions for the exam, because again, I mean, I mentioned this throughout the semester, I am going to reword them. You're not going to get the questions exactly as they're written. You'll probably see that question, but it probably won't be about an herbal supplement. It might be about something else. So again, the key here is for you to be able to recognize, what makes something possibly legitimate or what makes it not legitimate. In this case, the way the question is written, you're picking the one thing that makes perhaps the red flag. But I might reword the question to where it's a bunch of red flags and you're picking out the one thing that actually suggests that it is legit. So keep that in mind. All right. Which statement is a valid scientific hypothesis? Remember, a hypothesis is a tentative answer to a question, and you have to be able to test it, and it must be falsifiable. So with that in mind, let's look at the options, because again, I'm going to reword it. So keep that in mind. Human history is determined by a series of supernatural events. That is a tentative answer, but we cannot test that. How do we test to see if it's a supernatural event? We cannot falsify that. We cannot test it. So A is not correct. B, humans should help in the conservation of other animal species. I agree with that statement, but that's not a hypothesis. That's not even, unless the question was, if first of all, it doesn't even address a question unless there was a question, should humans help in the conservation of other species? And then, yes, you could have a tentative answer, humans should, but that's not really a hypothesis. That's more of a moral statement. You're saying what humans should or should not do. Next, humans are controlled by forces beyond our understanding. Again, just like A, that's not a correct answer because we cannot test that. We cannot falsify that. It might be true. Maybe there's a God out there who is controlling every single little thing we do, and we don't understand it. That might be true. However, scientifically, we cannot falsify that. Therefore, it's not a valid hypothesis. Humans and bacteria share a common genetic code. There's your answer, right? We can test that. We can we can look at the human genetic code. We can then we can look at the bacteria genetic code, and we can compare the two. So yeah, that would be the answer. And again, I would reword that. So the question that you see on the exam is not going to be about human and bacteria, but there will be a hypothesis. It will be a tentative answer to a question. It will be something that is testable and something that is falsifiable. What are the two main processes upon which ecosystems depend? We will talk about that later in the semester. That will not be on the exam. A hypothesis is what? We just talked about that. A proposed explanation for a set of observations? Yes. A guess made in order to determine what observations and explanations are necessary? No. Observation made in order to determine a theory? No. Theories are already determined, right? I'll come back to that later when we talk about theories. Or a theory determined after data collection? No, the answer is a proposed explanation for a set of observations. Do not mix up hypothesis and theory. Remember, a theory is big, it's broad, it's more substantiated, like the theory of gravity, the theory of evolution. It's been around a long time. There's been so many studies that support it. A hypothesis is a lot more specific. It's like addressing a very specific question, or as this is written in this question, a very specific set of observations. So again, I think I used this example in the lecture. I noticed that the spot in the yard where my dog pees, the grass is really nice, and it's nicer than the other parts of the yard. That's the set of observations, right? So a hypothesis, then I might have a question. It was like, well, is dog urine good for grass? And then I might have a hypothesis, which is a proposed explanation for that observation, which is yes, dog urine is good for grass, right? And that would be a hypothesis because it is a proposed explanation. It is something I could test. It is something I could falsify. Okay. You try to start your car, but it does not start. Which of these is a prediction? This will be on the exam. Not exactly as it's written, but there will be something where you have to pick out a prediction or maybe a hypothesis or maybe a question or maybe an observation. The point is, you're going to get a question like this, and you're going to have to pick out one of the steps of the scientific process. In this case, this particular question is asking about a prediction. So which of these is a prediction? My car's battery is dead. No, that is a hypothesis, right? That is a proposed explanation. We could test that. Here we go. If I recharge the battery, then my car will start. And that is the answer to this. Remember, generally speaking, a prediction is going to be an if-then statement. And also a prediction basically is you basically reword your hypothesis, but in such a way that you're describing how you are going to test it. So for example, again, the hypothesis here is my car's battery is dead. You could have a different prediction, as you should have multiple predictions for each hypothesis. You could put something like, if I replace the battery, then my car will start. If I test my battery, then I will find it is dead, right? There's all these different predictions based on that one hypothesis. So keep that in mind. Well, let's look at these other options too. Go ahead and talk about them. My car is too old to function properly. You can't really test that. That's not really specific enough. And it's certainly not a prediction because you're not describing how you're going to test it. So that's not a hypothesis or a prediction. What is wrong with my car? Question mark. Obviously, it has a question mark. If it has a question mark, it's a question. It's not an observation. It's not a hypothesis. It's not a prediction. It's not an experiment. It's a question. So keep all that in mind. Again, for the exam, I might not use the word prediction. You might have to know the observation, the hypothesis, the question. And obviously, I probably am not going to use this exact example of a car's battery. I probably also will not use the thing used in chapter 1, which is the thing about the remote control in the television. So it'll be a new situation that you've not seen before, but you need to be able to recognize different portions of the scientific process. All right, how do hypotheses differ from theories? I've already kind of hinted at this, and here's the answer. Theories are more comprehensive than hypotheses, right? That means they're bigger, they're broader, they explain more. Another way I could word that is I could say hypotheses are more specific than theories, right? I'm saying the same thing, I'm just saying it a different way. So keep that in mind when you're answering this question on the exam, if it's on there. Theories must be testable. Hypotheses do not need to be testable. Nope, that's a bunch of garbage. Theories are testable. You can still test theories, and you do that by forming new hypotheses and testing those specific hypotheses. So yes, everything in science has to be testable. Hypotheses are educated guesses, and theories are tentative explanations. No. Hypotheses are tentative explanations. And during the lecture, I told you, you probably grew up hearing a hypothesis is an educated guess, and that's not necessarily accurate. And I talked about that. I talked about why earlier. An educated guess, that's not enough. It has to be testable. It has to be falsifiable. So that is not the answer. And I shouldn't say I guarantee. I'm willing to bet money right now that the people who miss that question, this is the choice that they're going to choose when they miss it. And we will see. That's my prediction. Of course, I don't mean prediction in the scientific sense. Anyway, let's look at this other option and talk about why it's not correct. Hypotheses are derived from experimentation, where theories are derived from observation. No. Remember, experiments are there to test hypotheses. So, the way that your book teaches it, right? If we look at the scientific process in order, then we get, we have a hypothesis, and then we do an experiment to test that hypothesis. Now, you could argue that, you do an experiment, and then that leads you to new questions and new hypotheses. But even then, the point is you don't go straight from performing an experiment to a new hypothesis. Before that, you have to have the results of the experiment. You have to analyze the results. And from there, then you might come up with new questions. And then from those new questions, you might come up with a hypothesis. So hypotheses are not directly derived from experimentation. And theories, again, they're not derived from observation. That's the first step. Observation is the first step. And then from the observations, you come up with questions, you come up with hypotheses, you come up with predictions, you test those hypotheses using the predictions. And eventually, after you've tested it enough, you will eventually have yourself a theory. But anyway, that's not the correct answer. Which function is not a property of life? You will get probably a question like this. Obviously, I'm going to change the wording, but basically to study for this, you should familiarize yourself with the textbook where it gives you the properties of life. And you should memorize them. But the good news is the question is going to be a lot like this, meaning I'm not going to say list all the properties of life. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a list, and I'm going to say something like, which of these in this list is not a property of life, like this question says. Or I might do the opposite and give you a list of things that are not properties of life, but only one of them is, in which case the question would say which function is a property of life. So keep that in mind. And let's look at the options. Populations of organisms rarely change over time. That is an incorrect statement because populations do evolve, and that is one of the properties of life. So there you go. Right now, that is the answer. Living things exhibit complex but ordered organization. That is definitely a property of life. That was the first thing we talked about, order. Organisms take in energy and use it to perform all life activities, right? The transformation of energy, that is a property of life. So that is the wrong answer. Organisms reproduce with their own kind. Again, that is a property of life. Reproduction is a property of life. So the only one that is not a property of life is this. That being said, if I were to change the wording to this question to make that a correct answer, I would say something like populations of organisms change over time, right? Because populations of organisms do evolve. So I could turn that into a correct answer. And then I can maybe say, I don't know, and then come up with something else that's not a property of life. So think about that when you're studying. Keep in mind that I'm going to change the wording. And the best way to study for this question is to know all the properties of life. And again, you're not going to have to list them all. You're just going to have to be able to look at a list and identify one, or identify one that is not a property of life. All right, antibiotic resistance. That is a question about evolution. We're not going to have that on this exam. Which of these required for natural selection? Same thing can be said, not on this exam. Which of these statements is correct? Scientific ideas are subjected to repeated testing. Yes, that is true. Science is not set in stone. All conclusions are susceptible to being tested again, and they should be tested again. Science can be used to prove or disprove the idea that deities or spirits cause earthquakes and other natural disasters. Incorrect, right? Because we cannot falsify that. If I tell you, I'm Greek. If I were to tell you Zeus caused COVID-19, you cannot disprove that. You could study COVID-19 and study it, and eventually you might even be able to pinpoint the exact mutation that started it. But even then, I could just say, yeah, Zeus did that, right? You cannot falsify that. So that's why it is not a correct statement. Science does not require observations that other people can confirm. Nope, that's the opposite of true. Any observations used in science, any data collected has to be confirmed. Other people have to be able to confirm it, right? So I cannot perform a study where I say, all right, here's my data, but there's no way you guys can see it. You just have to take my word for it. Right? That's not science. Only exploratory science can lead to important conclusions about nature. That's just not a true statement. There are other types of science. So there you go. Let me see if anybody's here. Nope, still nobody here. Everybody's going to do great on this exam. You guys are very confident. Anyway, which results should occur if climate change leads to increased global warming temperatures or warming global temperatures? That won't be on this exam. We'll talk about it later. Which structures can perform all the activities required for life? You should know this. The answer is simply cells, right? DNA molecules make up cells. Organelles make up cells. The nuclei is a part of the cell, but the answer is cells, right? All the parts of a cell by themselves, they cannot perform all the activities required for life. It is the cell itself that can do that. That is the answer. That is one of the properties of life. Information flow in biological systems is necessary for negative regulatory or regulative feedback to operate. Which of these examples does not involve the flow of information? I'm not going to ask you about that, and I would talk about it, but I'm just trying to speed this through just in case I get interrupted. What name is given to the functional compartment of a cell? Those are called organelles. That won't be on the exam. Which information flow is disrupted when diabetes destroys insulin-producing cells? That was just an example in your book, so I'm not going to put that on the exam. Over a span of 2 decades. Oh, no, we're talking about evolution again. That will not be on this first exam. What are genes composed of? That'll be on the third exam, not this one. What processes account for the different breeds of domesticated dogs? There we go, talking about evolution again, not on this exam. In what ways is the science of biology related to our society? That's probably not going to be on the exam, but all the options are true. Which sequence shows the step of the Okay, here's a question you will need to know. You need to know the scientific process in order. And I like the way this question is written because it doesn't have all the steps, because it's a little bit easier when you have all the steps. Observation / exploration, question, hypothesis, prediction, experiment, analysis, right? So you need to know it in order. But again, it's a multiple choice exam, so there will be no question where I say list them all in order. You'll just need to, just like in this question, look at a list and figure out which one is in the correct order. Experiment definitely does not come before experiment does come before the conclusion, but exploration comes way before that. Question doesn't, observation comes before question, so that's not it. Exploration, yeah, you explore something. That usually leads to a question, which then leads to a hypothesis, which then leads to a prediction, which then leads to an experiment. So C is the correct answer. And again, I will reword this for the exam, so it probably won't be exactly that. But again, you just need to know it in the correct order. Another thing to point out is that your book kind of uses the word exploration as well as observation interchangeably. So the first step in the scientific process is exploration / observation. So you might see either one of those. You might see both. Number 5, which substance is not recycled? Ecosystems, we'll talk about that later. Darwin, we'll talk about that later. Adaptation, we'll talk about that later. So there we go. We are done with chapter 1. Let's roll on to chapter 2. Okay. Nope. Introduction. There we go. Chapter 1. Let me go back up here. Chapter 2 study guide. Let's open it up. Here we go. What name is given to a bonds that involve the sharing of electrons? Remember, if you're sharing electrons, it's covalent. And remember, the way the hints I gave you during the lecture were, like cohabitating means you share a place to live. Co-parenting usually means like, divorced couple is sharing parental responsibility. So when you hear co, you should think of sharing. And obviously we're talking about electrons because, as you learned in this course, when we're talking about chemical reactions, we're basically talking about electrons. And also the word valence is in reference to the valence ring. So covalent, sharing of electrons. And let's look at these options. Polar, that's a trick question. There is no polar bond. Now, there's polar molecules that lead to something called a hydrogen bond, but there are no polar bonds. Be careful for this. And this is a good time for me to tell you how this exam is going to work on some of the questions. On some of the questions, there's going to be really, really wrong answers, like this one. So, for example, when you see this question on the exam, if you guess covalent's the correct answer. If you guess covalent, you'll get 100% correct, right? If you guess hydrogen or ionic, you'll get half credit. If you guess something off the wall like polar, which is not even one of the 3 bonds that I've taught you, you'll get 0 credit. So this exam is set up for you to do good, even as long as you're in the ballpark. You should at least do okay. Anyway, which of the following elements is a trace element? You do not need to know that. I told you will not have to memorize that list. And atoms blank are found in its nucleus. You do need to know this. It should be pretty easy. It's neutrons and protons are found in the nucleus, right? Because electrons are found outside of the nucleus. So neutrons and protons found in the nucleus. Here's one. I'm not even talking about it because I'm short on time and it won't be on the exam. So you're not going to have to do how many oxygen atoms or blah, 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 whatever. Here's one that people miss all the time. I'm telling you right now. I'm giving you the heads up, and you're still going to miss it. People are still going to miss this, even though I'm telling you right now. Adjacent water molecules interact with one another via what kind of bonds? So in your mind, picture what we're talking about. We're talking about water molecules, like a bunch of water molecules hanging out next to each other. How do they interact with each other? Hydrogen bonds, right? It's that partially positive hydrogen that is attracted to the partially negative oxygen, right? Because we are talking about adjacent water molecules. The key here being molecules, plural. We're not talking about a single water molecule. We're not talking about one oxygen bonded to two hydrogens. We're talking about multiple water molecules, and they interact via hydrogen bonds. Also, meanwhile, there will be a different question on this exam that looks a lot like this question, but it will not be asking about adjacent water molecules. It will be asking about one single water molecule. What is holding those hydrogens to that oxygen? And the answer to that is going to be covalent bonds. And again, like I said earlier, polar bond isn't even a thing. So if you guess that or any other wacky word I might throw in there, you're going to lose more points. At least if you get one of these 3, you'll get partial credit. All right. A base. You need to know what a base is. Does it remove water from a solution? No. Does it decrease the pH of a solution? No, it increases it. Does it remove OH from a solution? No. It actually kind of uses OH, right? It kind of puts OH minus in a solution. Does it remove H plus from a solution? Yes. So the answer to this question, the way it's written, is D. It removes H plus ions from a solution. Now, I can reword this to say it increases the pH of a solution, in which case B would be correct. Or I could say it adds OH minus to a solution, in which case it would be correct. Or I could put it, well, this one is already correct. I could say it adds H plus ions to a solution, in which case this one would be incorrect. So keep that in mind. Don't study these questions verbatim and memorize exactly how they're written, because they will be reworded. What name is given to a substance that resists changes in pH? Is pretty straightforward. The answer is just buffer, right? A buffer is something that resists changes in pH. You learned about it in lecture. You learned about it in lab. There's nothing much to say about it. The hydrogen and oxygen atoms of a water molecule here, we were talking about this earlier, right? We're no longer talking about adjacent water molecules. We are talking about a single water molecule. What kind of bonds holds that thing together? Covalent bonds. And again, if you guess something off the wall like polar, you're going to lose more points. All right. And here, this is the same question, just asked not as this one, but this question here is rewording the other question that you had a little bit earlier. Adjacent water molecules interact through what? And the way the other one was worded, the answer was hydrogen bonds. So basically, this is asking the same thing, except instead of using the word hydrogen bonds, it uses the description of hydrogen bonds. So it's not a sharing of electrons, because that would be a covalent bond. So that means A and C are not correct. All right, so that leaves B and D, where we're talking about electrical attractions. Let's see. Electrical attraction between the hydrogen of one water molecule and the oxygen of another. There we go. That's the correct answer. But let's look at the other one and see why it's wrong. Electrical attraction between the hydrogen atoms of adjacent water molecules. No, the hydrogen atom of one water molecule is not attracted to the hydrogen atom of another, because the hydrogen atoms are partially positive, so they are going to repel each other. So there you go. All right, sulfur has an atomic number of 16. How many covalent bonds can sulfur form? You will probably get a question like this. It's obviously not going to be sulfur. It also won't be one of those elements that you did in lab, because you're really familiar with them. The idea here is to be able to use problem solving. So if sulfur's atomic number is 16, that means by definition it has 16 protons. Now, since we didn't say anything about it having a charge, that means it also has 16 electrons. So we have 2 on the inside and then 8 on the next ring. So that's 10. So that leaves us with 6 electrons on its outermost ring. Sulfur has 6 electrons on its valence ring. However, to have a full shell, a total of 8, that means it needs 2 more. Therefore, sulfur can bond 2 times. And again, sulfur is not going to be on the exam, but you will have a question where you get this information and you have to problem solve and figure it out. And that is how you do it. All right. Isotopes of an element have the same number of blank and a different number of blank. You should know this. If you change the number of protons, you change the element. If you change the number of electrons, you make an ion. If you change the number of neutrons, you make an isotope. So obviously they're going to have the same number of protons. So there you go. You know it's either going to be A or B. And different number of, and the answer is A, neutrons. Because again, if you were to change the number of electrons, then it would be an ion, not an isotope. If you were to change the number of neutrons, well, it wouldn't be the same element. If you were to change the number of electrons, well, let's just leave it at that. All right. All of the following are potential negative impacts of ocean acidification. That won't be on the exam. I don't have time to talk about it. Blankens is an example of an element. I'm not going to have that on the exam either. What type of cancer? No, that won't be on the exam. When a base is added to a buffered solution. All right, here we go. I like this because earlier I asked you what a buffer is, and it's something that resists the change in pH. This is a better question because it requires you to think a little bit more. Yeah, you know it resists changes in pH, but this question also requires you to know that, something that's acidic has H plus ions. Something that's basic has OH minus ions. So let's look at the options. When a base is added to a buffered solution, the buffer will do what? So think about this. You're adding a base. So the buffer wants to do the opposite of what the base is doing. Now the base is donating OH ions. So the buffer is not going to do that. That's not the opposite. That would make the pH change quicker. So that's not correct. Accepts water molecules? No, that's way off. No one talked about adding water molecules water molecules when we're talking about acids or bases. Donate H plus ions. There's the correct answer, because that's the opposite, right? A base, an acid is the thing that has H plus ions. So if you add a base, this is going to do what the acid does, which is donate H plus ions. And of course, forms covalent bonds with the base. No one said anything about anything like that in the lecture. So the answer is donates H plus ions. Now remember, for the exam, I might say when an acid is added to a buffered solution instead of a base. Also, I could change the wordings for this. I could keep the question the same, but change the options where it says, let's just leave it at that. I don't have time to get into it. How do radioactive isotopes differ from isotopes not on the exam? Here's one thing you do need to know. I've been telling you for a while that you need to know this. Human cells are approximately how much water? 70 to 95%. There's not much else I can say about that. That is the answer. In order to have a positive charge, an atom must have what? This is easy, right? Protons are positive, electrons are negative. Just remember that. So then once you know that, then look at the options. More protons than electrons? Boom, there's the answer. More electrons than protons? No, that would be negative. More neutrons than protons? Nope, neutrons are neutral. They won't affect anything. And more protons and neutrons, again, neutrons are neutral, so they won't affect anything. The key here is, remember, I will reword this for the exam. So it might say in order to have a negative charge, that might not be positive. And the options might say something like fewer protons. So I could change this word, right? I could have the same question, but I might say something like fewer electrons than protons, which would make this the correct answer, right? Fewer electrons than protons is another way of saying more protons than electrons. So remember, don't memorize these verbatim. Understand the concepts, not the exact way that they're worded. All right. What are the reactants in the chemical reaction? Yes, you probably have to have something like this. I told you during the lecture that as far as we're concerned in this course, reactants are always on the left, products are always on the right, and the arrow always points away from the reactants and towards the products. So you will get some question with some chemical reaction you've probably never seen before. I might ask you about the reactants. I might ask you about the products. Just remember, reactants on the left, products on the right. In this particular case, we have C6H12O6 and H2O as our reactants. So that is, oh yeah, sorry, and right in front of me. I need to wear my glasses. And oxygen, right? So there's three reactants: C6H12O6, H2O, and O2. So the answer would be B in this case. And again, for the exam, I might ask about reactants. I might ask about products, and I would definitely give you a different chemical reaction. Reactants on the left, products on the right. All right. Then I like this little trick question. Beryllium's atomic mass is 9. Its atomic number is 4. How many protons are found in the beryllium atom? This question, the way it's written, is meant to trick you into thinking that you're going to have to do a basic math question, but the answer is actually right here. The atomic number is 4. And what you need to know is that the atomic number tells you how many protons there are. So the answer to this question is simply 4. However, for the exam, I'm not going to give you beryllium. I'll give you some other element. And it might be different. I might tell you the atomic mass, and then I might give you the atomic number, and then I might say how many neutrons, right? So in that case, it would go like this. Its atomic mass is 9. The atomic number is 4. How many neutrons are in there? Well, we know that the protons plus neutrons gives you the atomic mass. We know that the atomic number is 4, meaning that there's 4 protons. So 4 plus what equals 9? And the answer would be 5. So if this question was asking about neutrons, then the answer would be 5. All right. Why is water considered a polar molecule? The oxygen is found between the 2 hydrogen atoms. That is a true statement. It is, but that's not what makes it. That's not enough information to describe what makes it a polar molecule. This is a good time for me to tell you, make sure you read all the choices on the exam, because you need to pick the most correct statement. Not always. So sometimes there'll be something correct, but there'll be something a little bit more correct. So read them all. The oxygen atom attracts the hydrogen atoms. No, not necessarily, right? Because that could just be any old covalent bond, right? Because those things are attracted to each other. The oxygen end of the molecule has a slight negative charge, and the hydrogen end has a slight positive charge. That is the answer. That's what makes it a polar molecule. Anyway, let's look at this. Both hydrogen atoms are at one end of the molecule and the oxygen is at the other end. See, to me, D and A are very similar. Both correct statements. And without those things, sure, it would not be a polar molecule, but C is the best answer. All right, what are the four most common elements found in a living organism? Like I told you, the big four, you need to know them: carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen. The answer is B. Just leave it at that. Not much else to say. Relative to a pH of 7, a pH of 4 has what? All right, you need to know this. Remember, every time you move one step in the pH scale, you multiply by 10. So we're going from 7 to 4. So 7 to 6 is 10. And then you go from 6 to 5. That's 100 because you multiply that by 10. And then you go from 5 to 4, and that's 1,000, right? Because, again, you multiplied it by 10. So we're dealing with 1,000. So there we go. Right off the bat, we know that the B is the correct answer because it's the only one that has the correct number. However, the way the question is going to be written on the exam, I might have a few things with the correct number on it. So that means you also need to understand the other part. Higher H concentration, lower H concentration. You need to know that. So remember, if the number is lower, that means it's going to be, all right, let's think about all the different ways I could reword this to be the correct answer. 1,000 times more acidic, 1,000 times less basic, 1,000 times fewer OH minus concentration or lower OH minus concentration. So you have to know that. Know that each step is a times 10 and know that going up is basic, meaning less H plus ions and more OH minus ions. And know that going down is more acidic, which means more H plus ions and fewer OH minus ion, because I could write this question any of those ways and use different numbers. So just keep that in mind. All right. Some tiny insects, I'm not going to ask you that. That's kind of trivial as far as the semester is concerned. So this next question is sort of the same thing, except now it's giving you a picture instead of giving the information. How does apple juice compare to lemon juice? All right, so apple juice is a 3, lemon juice is a 2. So we know the lemon juice is more acidic because it's lower. How much more acidic? Well, it's one step, so it's 10 times more acidic. Now let's think about all the different ways we could say that. Lemon juice is 10 times more acidic than apple juice. Apple juice is 10 times more basic than lemon juice. Lemon juice has 10 times more H plus ions than apple juice. Lemon juice has 10 times fewer OH minus ions than apple juice. Apple juice has 10 times fewer H plus ions than lemon juice. Apple juice has 10 times more OH minus ions than lemon juice. All those different ways to describe that one situation. And that's how it's going to be on the exam. Anyway, the key here is that we know 10 is the number. So we know it's either B or C. Lemon juice has 10 times higher H plus concentration. Yep, that's the answer. All right. I don't know if this is going to be on. No, this is not going to be on the exam because you're going to come back to this concept later in the semester. And at that point, I'll spend more time on it and we'll have it on the exam. So for now, let's just skip it. 10, I'm not going to have that either. I don't like that analogy. Radiometric dating won't be on there. What is the outcome of evaporative cooling? Yeah, basically, why do you sweat? Well, it's to decrease your body temperature. I don't know. I might have that on there. I might not. That's a pretty simple question, right? Why do you sweat? Well, you're trying to cool yourself down. You're trying to cool your body temperature down, right? Not the air temperature near you, and definitely not that has nothing to do with your blood pH. Here we go. An atom has 20 protons, 20 neutrons, 20 electrons. What atom is being described? Well, let's see. 20 protons. That means its atomic number is 20. There we go. Calcium is the answer. And yes, you will get a question like this. It's not going to be calcium, right? The number won't be 20, but it'll be something else. And you might get a question like that. And remember, the number of protons, that is the atomic number. All right. An uncharged atom of mercury has an atomic number of 80, atomic mass of 200. All right. The atom has blank protons. All right. Well, we know right off the bat its atomic number is 80, and that is the same as the number of protons. So this atom has 80 protons. So we know right off the bat the answer is either A or D. If it has 80 protons and it's uncharged, Then we know it also has 80 electrons. Again, could be A or D. So then we need to figure out how many neutrons it has. Well, let's pull up the calculator. The atomic mass is the number of protons plus the number of neutrons, right? And we know how many protons it has. It has 80. So if the atomic mass is 200, right? Let's subtract 80 because that's the number of protons, and that tells us how many neutrons are left. So 120. So the answer is A. 80 protons, 120 neutrons, 80 electrons. And yes, you might have a question like that on the exam. And obviously, it's not going to be mercury. It'll be a different element with different numbers. All right, here's a really easy one. An atom with an electrical charge is what? It's an ion. It's just that simple. If you give up or take extra electrons, you're going to change the charge and you're going to make an ion. There's not much else to say about that. The bond between the oppositely charged ions is what? This should be very easy. It's in the name. It's an ionic bond. And again, like I've said earlier, polar bond doesn't even exist. So if you choose that, you're going to lose extra points. Don't ever choose polar bond. Polar bond is not a thing. The only bonds are ionic, hydrogen, and covalent. So if you see anything other than ionic, hydrogen, or covalent, don't choose it because you will lose extra points for that. All right. Consider the following reaction. What type of bond is holding the two together? I never talked about this in the lecture, but here's the key here. This is positively charged. This is negatively charged. Therefore, it's an ionic bond. If it's positive and negative held together, that is, obviously an ionic bond. There's not much else to say about that. As water freezes, what happens? Its molecules further. Yes, the answer is this. How do you remember that? Well, remember, ice floats in water, right? And anything that floats, it means it's less dense. So if water is less dense, if ice is less dense than liquid water, then what makes it less dense? Well, the molecules have to be farther apart. So that is why that is the correct answer. Which of the following is an acid? Didn't talk about that. Won't be on the exam. The tendency of molecules of the same kind to stick together. I might ask you this. The answer is cohesion. Co being the giveaway there because it's the same. Adhesion would be different. Like, so if you get super glue stuck to your fingers, that would be adhesion because those are different things. Yeah. How can radiation be in it? That won't be on there. All atoms of an element have the same number of what? I've already said this a million times. The answer is protons, right? Atoms are defined by the number of protons. All right. Moving right along. I might be able to knock out chapter 3 for you as well. Chapter 3. All right. Chapter 3, study guide. Where are you at? There's the PowerPoints. There's some old videos. There we go. Study guide. Really quickly, let's knock this out. What name is given to the following reaction? Okay. Here's what you need to know. Water molecules are in the products. If it produces water molecules, it's a dehydration reaction. So you'll get a question with some reaction you've never seen in your life, theoretically. And if the water molecules are being produced, it's dehydration. If water molecules are in the reactant side, it's hydrolysis. If you see anything other than hydrolysis or dehydration, don't choose it because that's not even a real option and you're going to lose more points for it. All right, what can you conclude about the following reaction? Galactose plus glucose equals lactose plus water. Glucose and lactose are both disaccharides. You don't necessarily know that. This is an example of a hydrolysis reaction. That is the opposite of true, and I just told you why the earlier question. Lactose is a disaccharide. You don't necessarily know that. That one won't even be on there because I don't have time to talk about it. A fat that is completely hydrogenated. You need to know this. So when we say a fat is saturated, right? This is kind of the same question because remember, you hydrogenate a fat to make it completely saturated. So basically, what is it saturated with? It's saturated with hydrogens. And remember, when they're saturated, that means the fatty acids are really straight, which means they can stack on top of each other, which means they are solid at room temperature. So we know if it's hydrogenated, it would be saturated. So it's either C or D. And like I said, it's solid at a room temperature. So the answer is C. Carbohydrates typically include, and you should know this from the lab, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen atoms. I don't know if I'm going to put that on the exam, though, because I don't remember saying that during the lecture. I'll be right back. All right, I'm running short on time. Let's keep going here. Okay, no one's here still. I'm still talking to myself. Which molecule is an example of polysaccharide? Yes, you should know all the examples of the polysaccharide. The only one on here that is starch. Don't forget there's also cellulose and glycogen. So, you know, the options will probably be different on the exam. What is the main sugar found in milk? I'm not going to ask you about that. It's lactose. Saturated fats are saturated with what? We already told you it's hydrogen. You should recognize this as a steroid because it has those 4 rings. So the answer is simply steroid. For good health, it's important to include what in our diets? I'm probably not going to ask you this because this is not a health and fitness class, but the answer is polysaccharides. You know, fiber is good for your diet. Which molecule listed below are isomers? I told you what an isomer is when we talked about this, and it was glucose and fructose. But I also said that you would not have to memorize the fact that glucose and fructose are isomers. Just remember, isomers are 2 different molecules that have the same chemical formula, but a different shape. So anyway, what is the name given to the reaction that breaks peptide bonds? The fact that it's a peptide bond doesn't even matter. The point is, if you're breaking a bond, the answer is hydrolysis. Remember, if you break a bond, it's hydrolysis. If you're making new bonds, it's dehydration. Definitely don't choose anything if it's more than these 2 choices. If it's not dehydration or hydrolysis, you're going to lose extra points. How do these things compare? This is what I was getting at earlier. They have the same formula but different structures, right? These things are isomers. So anyway, there's that. Because it says right here, they all have the same formula. So you know they have the same formula. You can look at them and see they have different structures. So there you go. So there's the answer. Of course, on the exam, it might say something like, instead of saying they have the same formula but different structures, it might just say they are isomers, because that is saying the same thing in a different way. What name is given to the following reactions? Sucrose plus water, glucose plus fructose. So again, here we go. The answer is hydrolysis. Not that you need to memorize anything about sucrose and glucose and fructose, but the fact that water is on the reactant side means it's hydrolysis. Water on the left, hydrolysis. Water on the right, dehydration. Again, anything other than those 2, and you'll lose extra points. DNA won't be on this exam; it'll be on another one. You don't need to be able to recognize a hydroxyl group. We don't talk about lactose intolerance on the exam. No DNA. Which is hydrophilic? Yes, you should know this. Hydrophilic things would be like carbohydrates. Hydrophobic things would be like lipids. Another thing that usually works in an exam when you have no idea what's going on is one of these things is not like the other. So here we go. Cellulose is a carbohydrate. Testosterone is a lipid. Butter is a lipid. Cholesterol is a lipid. So cellulose, one of these things is not like the other, right? So cellulose is the answer. It's hydrophilic. And of course, for the exam, I might ask you for something that's hydrophobic instead of hydrophilic. Or I might ask you about something that's hydrophilic, but give you different choices. A friend of yours has put on a lot of muscle really quickly. He also has a bunch of other telltale signs that tell you he might be abusing anabolic steroids. That's not going to be on the exam, probably. Nucleic acids are polymers of what? Yes, you need to know this. The monomer of a nucleic acid is nucleotide. Remember, you need to know the monomer and the polymer of everything, we discuss in this chapter. This one won't be on the exam. It's just too long. I don't want to make you. I don't want to want you spending a lot of time reading questions because your time is limited. In the following reaction, galactose is a blank. So we have galactose plus glucose, lactose plus water. We know here that we have water on the right-hand side, so we know that that means we have a dehydration reaction, which means we're bringing things together. So you could guess then that since galactose and glucose are coming together to make a larger molecule, that galactose is a monomer. But I don't like that. That's not specific enough. I probably will not have that on the exam. Proteins are polymers constructed from which monomers? Again, you need to know all the polymers and monomers. So proteins, the monomer are amino acids. The monomers are amino acids. You need to know that. How is RNA different from DNA? I'm not quite sure if I'm going to have that on this exam. But remember, RNA is single-stranded, DNA is double-stranded. So that's not correct. This one right here. RNA is a polymer of amino acids. DNA, nope. We know that's not correct either. Only proteins are polymers of amino acids. RNA contains uracil, DNA contains thymine. That is the correct answer. All right, let's just move forward. The figure below shows what? So what we see here is DNA. The reason I know it's DNA is because I see a T here, and there's no T in RNA. So it is a single strand of DNA. C is the correct answer, right? We can see it's a single strand because it's only this one sugar phosphate backbone and one set of bases. And again, because there's a T, I can tell it's RNA, DNA, and not RNA. The molecule, this molecule right here, is best described as what? I don't know if I'm going to have this on there or not, but it's an organic compound, right? It's carbon based, right? So you don't necessarily, it's not a protein. I won't get into it. Don't have time, but yeah, it's carbon based. It's an organic compound. DNA nucleotide includes what? You need to know this for DNA and RNA. Remember, I told you need to know that. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, so basically they're asking the 4 different bases of DNA. I'm not sure if you need to know this, but if you do study it and try to memorize it, it'll suffice if you just remember the letters A, T, C, and G. So no U. So we know that's not the right answer. T, G, A, and C. There we go. That is correct. And again, one of these things is not like the other. I don't have time to get into that either. But yeah, the answer is T, G, A, and C, right? The order doesn't matter. As long as it has those 4, then it's DNA. Plants use which molecule as energy storing carbohydrate? You should know this. The answer is starch. Remember, starch is used to store energy for plants, unlike glycogen, which is used to store energy for animals. And that question might ask that instead. Animals use which molecule as an energy storing carbohydrate, in which case the answer would be glycogen. A fat contains which molecular components? I said you would need to know this. 3 fatty acids. That part should be easy to memorize because it's in the name. Triglyceride. And then there you go. Also the glyceride part. So there you go. The answer is D. 3 fatty acids in 1 glycerol molecule. By definition, what type of fatty acid has a double bond? It would have to be unsaturated, right? Because if it was saturated, all the carbons would be bonded to as many hydrogens as they could. But if there's a double bond, that means there's at least one carbon double bonded to another carbon. And that's 2 hydrogens that are not there that could have been. So again, by definition, what type of fatty acid has double bonds? Unsaturated. Complete the equation. Monosaccharide plus monosaccharide equals what plus water? Well, what's mono is prefix that means 1. So 1 plus 1 equals what? 2. What's another way of saying 2? Disaccharide is the answer. Which substance is lowest in unsaturated fat? I'm not going to ask you that. The answer is beef, but whatever. The protein's function, this is important, is dependent on what? Basically, what is important? The most important thing about a protein is its shape. And I kept saying that. It's very important. That's the answer. It's its shape. Oleic acid is a fatty acid that occurs naturally in many animal and vegetable fats and oils. What can you tell about the oleic acid just by looking at its structure? There's that double bond, another double bond. I can tell right away. Let's see. This thing is not saturated. So what are the choices here? Oleic acid is an unsaturated fatty acid. Yep, there's the answer. Obviously, it's not B because it's not saturated. It's unsaturated. And we don't know. I didn't tell you anything about determining whether or not something was a trans fat or not. So yeah, the answer is A. Table sugar is what? I said you might need to know this for the exam. The answer is sucrose, a disaccharide. There's not much else to say about that. What statement is true in regards to the DNA molecule? That'll be later on this semester. Same with question 45 later in the semester. Glucose is the starch. Is blank are the proteins? What a great question. Glucose is the monomer of starch. So basically, this is saying what are the monomers of proteins? And the answer is amino acids. A single carbon can form how many bonds? If you don't know this after that lab, then you need to redo the lab. The answer is 4. Carbon can bond 4 times. The ability to tolerate lactose, not on the exam. What name is given to this reaction? Well, we have water on the right-hand side. Therefore, it is a dehydration reaction. Water in the products, it's dehydration. Hydrolysis, water in the reactants, it's hydrolysis. And of course, here we go. Polymer and protein have nothing to do with this. So if you were to get this question and answer C or D, you would lose extra points. 20 will skip. Blank is a steroid. Yeah, I might ask you this. I don't know. I only told you about a few steroids, estrogen and testosterone. So, hopefully you would recognize one of those. Also, hopefully you would recognize butter as a fat, right? The triglyceride. Hopefully you would recognize sucrose as a carbohydrate, and hopefully you would recognize amino acids as the monomer of a protein. Anyway, okay. Cellulose is an example of what? Again, you should know this. It's a polysaccharide. There's not much else to say about that. Sometimes when I have my morning coffee, that's too long. I'm not going to have it on the exam. Lactose intolerance, not on the exam. Enzymes are, I might have this, proteins. That'll probably be later in the semester, but yeah, enzymes are proteins. That'll be very important later in the semester. What is the genetic basis for lactose intolerance in humans? Again, lactose, and that won't be on the exam. So here's something that you should know. No one is forced to watch this video. Obviously, no one was forced to be here, which is good. So no one was here. But let me tell you this. Somewhere on the exam, let me write this down for myself too. Somewhere on this exam, there's going to be an extra credit question. And the answer, or the question, is going to make absolutely no sense. So when and there's only, right now, I only plan on having one extra credit question anyway. But anyway, if you see a question that makes absolutely no sense at all, then the answer is tissue. And this is your extra credit for sitting through this video and preparing for the exam. So if you guess tissue on this weird extra credit question that makes absolutely no sense, then your reward is a 10% boost on your grade. So for example, if you get 100% on it, which I assume all of you will since no one showed up for the exam review, instead of having 100, you would have 110. If you had a 90, instead of a 90, you would have a 99. Instead of a 50, you would have a 55. I don't know, instead of so on and so forth. This is just a 10% boost. So again, at the end of the exam, not at the end, I don't know where it's going to be. Somewhere in the exam, there's going to be a question. It's going to be an extra credit question, and it will make absolutely no sense. And tissue is going to be one of the options in the multiple choice question, and that will be the correct answer, and you will get a 10% boost on your exam. All right. That being said, really quickly, I'll remind you on Monday morning, get in front of your computer, keep an eye on your email, hit the refresh button a few times if you need to make sure you don't miss it. But the exam is going to post automatically on Google Classroom. And when that happens, you are going to receive an email that says, hey, this is posted. So you can start it as early as you want. Just make sure you have hit the submit button by 8:50 a.m. There's going to be nothing to remind you to do it. So it's on you to remember to submit at 8:50 a.m. Every minute that you are late is going to cost you 10 points, right? So if you finish at 8:51, you're going to lose 10 points. So do not be late. If anything happens, you'd be better off just stopping the exam. Just make sure you stop at 8:50. Don't be late. If something happened and we need to do something, maybe your dog came and peed on your computer, or I don't know, your internet went out, we'll worry about that later. Let's put it this way. Generally speaking, if there's an emergency and you cannot take or finish the exam Monday by 8:50 a.m., then you and we will work something out. You'll probably have to take the exam at a later date or time. And basically, the longer you wait to take it, the harder the exam is going to be, because theoretically, the longer you take to take it, the more time you'll have to study for it. So that's how that's going to work. Anyway, I'm sorry nobody showed up to ask me questions, but I was able to go through each of the questions on the study guides that might be on the exam. So as you're studying this weekend, if you have any questions, contact me and let me know. I'll try my best to help you. And I guess that's it. Good luck on Monday.